Hunger is a strange and terrifying thing. When you are old and dying, it becomes less about the biological need for sustenance and more about a fading memory of what life used to taste like. I am Robert Calloway. I am 80 years old. I am a man who built a culinary empire from a single rusted food truck on the corner of 4th and Main in 1974. I know food. I know that love tastes like warm yeast-risen bread broken by hand. I know that ambition tastes like searing hot chili oil. And I know, with a certainty that sits heavy in my gut, that betrayal tastes like cold metal. For the past 6 months, I have been a prisoner in the master suite of my own estate. They use words like degenerative and idiopathic. My body is wasting away. My hands, which once filleted sole with the precision of a surgeon, now tremble so violently I cannot button my own shirt. My skin has turned the color of old parchment. My nephew, Julian, and his wife Samantha have been my caretakers. It started slowly. One by one, the people who had been my family for decades were stripped away until the house was empty of everyone except them and my head chef, Marco. Marco has been with me for 30 years. He is a man of few words, a culinary artist who speaks through broth and basil. Julian tried to fire him twice, but I refused to sign the severance checks, the one bit of financial leverage I still held in my trembling fingers. Tonight was the night. Tonight was the night I was supposed to sign over the Calloway Group, my restaurants, my brand, my legacy, to Julian. He claimed it was to protect the assets before my mind went completely. He organized a private celebratory dinner in the grand dining room. Just us family, Samantha had said earlier, her eyes gleaming with a greed she didn't bother to hide behind her false eyelashes. I was wheeled down to the table in my antique wheelchair. The ride down the elevator felt like a descent into a crypt. The dining room was dim, lit only by candelabras that flickered like my waning heartbeat. The long mahogany table, which had hosted presidents and critics, was set for 3. Julian stood at the head of the table. He looked handsome in the bohoboke suit I had paid for, but his eyes were hard. He picked up a bottle of wine, a 1982 Bordeaux from my private cellar, a bottle I had been saving for my wedding day that never came. "You want some?" Julian asked, smiling. He poured a glass for Samantha. He poured a glass for himself.
He swirled the deep red liquid, inhaling the bouquet with a performative flair that made my stomach churn. Then he picked up a crystal pitcher of water. "Water for you, Uncle Rob," he said with a smirk, pouring a glass of tap water into my crystal goblet. The meds, the pills they forced down my throat 3 times a day, the pills that made the room spin and my tongue feel like it was coated in lead. I sat there, gripping the armrests of my wheelchair, looking at the boy I had raised as a son. I remembered teaching him to tie his shoes. I remembered paying his tuition. I remembered bailing him out of jail when he was 22. And now I watched him swirl my wine in his glass, already celebrating my erasure. I felt weak. I felt pathetic. I was a king dethroned by his own jester. If you have ever poured your soul into someone, giving them your time, your money, and your love, only to have them look at your watch and wait for you to die so they can cash out. If you have ever felt the cold knife of ingratitude twist in your back, hit that subscribe button. Because what happened next wasn't just a dinner service. It was a declaration of war. And I want you to witness every second of it. "To the future," Samantha said, clinking her glass against Julian's. "To the Calloway Group," Julian replied. They drank. I stared at my water. The heavy oak door to the kitchen swung open. Marco entered. He was wearing his crisp white chef's coat, the one with my initials embroidered on the cuff. He carried a large silver tureen on a tray. The smell hit me instantly, earthy, rich, heavy with cream and thyme. Mushroom velouté, my favorite soup, the soup that had won me my first Michelin star. But Marco didn't look like a star chef tonight. His face was pale, beaded with sweat under the toque.
His eyes were darting around the room, landing on Julian, then Samantha, then the floor. He walked toward me. As he placed the bowl in front of me, his hand shook. A small drop of soup splashed onto the rim. I looked up at him. This was a man who could plate a hot soufflé during a minor earthquake without spilling a drop. Why was he shaking? "Marco," I whispered. He didn't answer. He leaned in to adjust my spoon, a service gesture he had performed 1,000 times. He brought his face close to mine, blocking Julian's view with his broad shoulder. He caught my eye. His gaze was intense, terrified, pleading. He mouthed 3 words.
No sound came out, but the movement of his lips was distinct, sharp, and deliberate. "Don't eat." My blood ran cold. Then Marco straightened up. He took a step back, his voice booming slightly too loud in the quiet room. "Enjoy, Mr. Calloway," he said. He retreated to the shadows of the kitchen doorway. He didn't leave. He stood there, watching like a hawk, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I froze. My spoon hovered over the creamy, gray surface of the soup. The steam rose up, carrying the scent of truffles and mushrooms. It smelled delicious. It smelled like comfort. But now, beneath the truffle oil, I imagined I could smell something else, something faint, something bitter. I looked at Julian. He was watching me intently. His fork was paused halfway to his mouth. He wasn't eating his steak. He was waiting. I looked at Samantha. She was watching too. Her smile was tight, predatory, her eyes fixed on my spoon. "Eat up, Uncle," Julian urged, his voice smooth. "Marco made it special just for you." "It smells strong," I lied. My voice was raspy, dry. "It's the truffles," Samantha said quickly, leaning forward. "They're fresh winter truffles. Go on. You need your strength for the signing." I looked at the soup. I looked at Marco in the doorway. He gave a microscopic shake of his head. I knew then. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that this bowl was the period at the end of my life sentence. I had to play the part. If I refused, they would know Marco had tipped me off. They would fire him. They might hurt him. And without Marco, I was dead anyway. I dipped the spoon into the liquid. Julian's eyes widened slightly. I brought the spoon to my lips. My hand trembled, real tremors this time, born of pure adrenaline. I let the liquid touch my lips. I kept my teeth clenched shut. I tilted the spoon, letting the soup wash over my lips, but not entering my mouth. I pretended to swallow. I made a gulping sound in my throat. I murmured weakly. Julian relaxed. He took a bite of his steak. I did this 3 times. Dip, touch, fake swallow. On the 4th time, I feigned a coughing fit. "I can't," I wheezed, dropping the spoon with a clatter. I grabbed my heavy linen napkin and pressed it to my mouth, spitting the trace amounts of liquid into the fabric. I bunched the napkin up in my fist, hiding the evidence. "My stomach," I gasped, doubling over in the chair. Julian's face darkened. The concern vanished, replaced by annoyance.
"You need to eat, Robert," he snapped. "You're wasting away." "Later," I gasped, leaning back, closing my eyes. "I just want to rest. Let's do the papers." Julian exchanged a look with Samantha, a look of frustration. The poison hadn't worked fast enough. Or maybe they wanted me to die after the signature, not before. "Fine," Julian said, pushing his plate away. He reached into his briefcase on the floor. He pulled out a thick stack of documents. "The lawyers prepared everything," Julian said, sliding the papers across the mahogany. He placed a heavy fountain pen on top. "Just sign on the highlighted lines." "For your protection," Samantha added, sipping my wine. I looked at the papers. The words swam before my eyes. Irrevocable trust, power of attorney, asset transfer. They were stealing everything. 40 years of sweat, 40 years of 4 a.m. market runs, 40 years of burns and cuts. I picked up the pen. It felt like a lead bar.
Julian watched the pen tip. He was practically vibrating. I lowered the pen to the paper. I signed. My hand shook, creating a jagged, messy signature. Robert Calloway. I dotted the I that wasn't there. I signed it again on the next page. Robert Calloway. And again. I misspelled my own name. Decades ago, when I first started franchising, I had a paranoid fear of forgery. I legally established that my official binding signature for corporate documents required the correct spelling. Any document signed Calloway with an A instead of an O was by the bylaws of my own corporation a non-binding draft. It was a fail-safe I had never told anyone about. Not even my wife. I signed my life away with a typo. Done, I whispered, dropping the pen. Julian snatched the papers. He flipped through them, checking for signatures. He didn't check the spelling. He was too arrogant. He saw the ink, and he saw dollar signs. Excellent, Julian said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Can I asked. Of course, Uncle, Samantha said. Marco, come wheel, mister. Marco stepped out of the shadows. He looked at the uneaten soup, then at me. Relief washed over his face, followed by a mask of servitude. Yes, ma'am, Marco said. He wheeled me out of the dining room. As we passed Julian, my nephew didn't even look at me. He was pouring another glass of wine, holding the contract up to the candlelight like a holy text. Marco wheeled me into the elevator. The doors closed.
The moment we were alone, Marco stopped the chair. He gripped my shoulder. Chef, he whispered, his voice trembling. No, I whispered back. Good. I don't know for sure, Marco said, pushing the button for the second floor. But I saw them. He wheeled me into my bedroom. He helped me into the bed. The room was cold. Leave the lights off, I commanded. Marco went to the door. He checked the hallway. It was empty. Julian and Samantha were still downstairs, celebrating their victory. Marco crept back to my bedside. He reached into his chef's coat and pulled out a tablet. I recorded the kitchen, chef, he whispered. I left my phone on the top shelf of the spice rack when they sent me to the cellar. He handed me a pair of headphones. I put them on. My hands were shaking, but my mind was starting to clear. The adrenaline of survival was burning off the fog of the drugs. I pressed play. The audio was clear, amplified by the acoustics of the tiled kitchen. It was Samantha's voice, sharp, impatient. Yes, Julian replied. I could hear the sound of a mortar and pestle grinding. I ground them into a powder. Marco won't notice. An hour, maybe 2. It slows the heart rate. It stops the electrical impulses. It'll look like heart failure. He's old. He's sick. He'll eat it. It's his favorite. And if he doesn't, well, we have the syringe for the night meds. I took off the headphones. The silence in the bedroom was deafening. The grief had me first. It wasn't a mental anguish. It was a physical blow to the stomach. A wave of nausea that had nothing to do with poison and everything to do with heartbreak. Julian. I remembered him as a boy, sitting on the counter of the food truck, swinging his legs while I chopped onions. I remembered him crying when he scraped his knee. I remembered the pride I felt when he graduated college. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They weren't just greedy relatives circling a dying man. They were actively killing me. They were grinding seeds. They were planning timelines. They were discussing my murder with the casual tone of someone discussing a grocery list. I looked at Marco. He was standing over me, his face a mask of sorrow and fear. He was waiting for me to break. He was waiting for the old man to cry. But I didn't cry. The grief began to recede, pulled back like the tide before a tsunami. In its place, something else rushed in. It was cold. It was heavy. It was hard as cast iron. Rage.
I sat up in bed. I pushed the blankets off my legs. I looked at my hands. They were still trembling, but not from weakness. They were trembling with the energy of a man who has just realized the game isn't over. I wasn't dying. I wasn't sick with a mystery illness. I was being poisoned. And if there was one thing I know,
One thing I have mastered in 50 years of running the brutal, cutthroat world of high-end kitchens, it is how to handle pests. "Marco," I said. My voice was low, steady, and devoid of the rasp that had plagued me for months. "Get it," I said, "and bring me a glass of water, a clean one." Marco nodded. He saw the shift in my eyes. He saw the old Robert Calloway return. "What?" Marco asked. I looked at the door, thinking of the two people downstairs drinking my wine and celebrating my death. "I'm going to cook," I said. I lay back against the pillows, listening to the house settle, the darkness around me no longer a tomb, but a blind. I was the best chef in the world, and tomorrow the menu was going to be strictly vengeance. Resurrection is not a glorious burst of light and angel song. It is waking up in a cold sweat, your heart hammering against your ribs, realizing that the people you loved most in the world are disappointed that you are still breathing. I sat up in bed, propped against 3 down pillows, listening to the heavy footsteps coming down the hallway. It was 8 a.m. The morning sun was slicing through the heavy velvet drapes, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Dust motes that Julian and Samantha had assumed would be settling on my corpse by now. I smoothed the newspaper on my lap. My hands were trembling, but for the first time in 6 months, it wasn't from a neurological failure. It was from a potent cocktail of adrenaline and rage. The door handle turned slowly. Julian entered. He wore a somber expression, his face already arranged into the mask of the grieving nephew. He was dressed in black, prematurely mourning the man he had murdered. He stepped into the room, his eyes fixed on the bed, expecting stillness, expecting the silence of the grave. Instead, I rustled the paper. "Good morning, Julian," I said. My voice was raspy, yes, but it was loud. It filled the room. Julian stopped dead in his tracks. He physically recoiled, stumbling back against the doorframe, his face drained of color, turning the shade of old milk. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out.
It was a masterpiece of confusion and terror, a look I would have paid $1,000 to capture in a photograph. "He stammered, his voice cracking. I am?" I said, forcing a cheerful smile that felt like stretching tight leather. "I feel remarkably better, Julian. I slept like a baby. Perhaps that soup Marco made gave me a burst of energy. The cream, maybe." I watched his throat work as he swallowed. He was processing the impossible. He knew the dose. He knew the timeline. By all medical logic, I should have been in cardiac arrest 6 hours ago. That's wonderful," Julian lied, walking slowly toward the bed, scanning the nightstand for the water glass, checking for signs of vomit or struggle. "We were worried." "Frail? Nonsense," I said, folding the paper. "In fact, I feel so reinvigorated that I've had an idea." "Uncle?" Julian asked, his eyes darting to the bathroom door, wondering if I had purged the poison. "I want to host a lunch today," I announced. "Here." Julian laughed nervously. "Uncle, you need to rest. You just signed the papers. You're exhausted. Let's just keep it quiet today." "No doctors," I snapped. I softened my tone immediately. "I want to celebrate, Julian. I want to invite the board of directors, all of them, today, to celebrate the transition. I want to see them shake your hand." Julian tried to argue. I could see the panic rising in him. He wanted me dead, not hosting a luncheon. He wanted to call the coroner, not the caterers, but he was trapped. If he refused a celebration of his own promotion, he would look suspicious. He had to play the part of the loving, grateful heir. He was calculating. I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. The poison just needs more time, he was thinking. His metabolism is slow. He'll collapse at lunch. It might be even better. A public death,
surrounded by witnesses who saw him happy just moments before. "All right," Julian said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "If you're up to it, I'll call Samantha." "Excellent," I said, "and tell Marco I want him to prepare the main course." "Fine," Julian said, backing out of the room as if I were a ghost. When the door closed, I slumped back against the pillows. The energy drained out of me. I was running on fumes and fury. He didn't know that I hadn't slept. He didn't know that while he was dreaming of spending my fortune, I had spent the morning huddled in the walk-in closet with the burner phone Marco had provided.
I had made 3 calls. The first was to Arthur, my personal lawyer for 40 years. I told him to bring the original copies of the corporate bylaws. The third call was to Chief Miller. Miller had been a regular at my first restaurant 30 years ago, back when he was a beat cop and I was a line cook. He had eaten gratis for a year when his wife got sick. Miller knew the taste of loyalty. I told him everything. I told him about the soup. I told him about the recording. I told him to be in the hedges at noon. I looked at the clock. 11 a.m. 1 hour until showtime. The lunch was set in the South Garden. The weather was insulting. Bright, cheerful sunshine, birds singing in the trellis, a light breeze rustling the leaves of the oak trees. It was a perfect day for a picnic, and a perfect day for an execution. I was wheeled out by Marco. He had dressed me in my white linen suit. I looked like a Southern gentleman, or perhaps a ghost. The board members were already there, 7 men and women in dark suits, holding flutes of champagne, looking uncomfortable in the midday heat. When they saw me, their faces softened into pity. They saw the frail old man in the wheelchair, the legend fading into obscurity. They didn't see the fire burning in my gut. They didn't see the wolf beneath the linen. "Robert," Sarah, the head of the audit committee, said, taking my hand. Her hand was warm. Mine was ice cold. "You look—" "I am ready, Sarah," I said. Julian and Samantha stood by the head of the long table. They were holding hands, presenting a united front. Samantha wore a floral dress that cost more than my first car. She looked radiant, but her eyes kept flicking to me, analyzing my breathing, checking my color. Julian announced, taking command. They sat at the head of the table, displacing me. I was positioned to the side, like a guest at my own funeral. "Before we eat," Julian said, standing up and tapping his glass with a silver fork, "I want to say a few words. I want to thank my uncle for his trust, for his mentorship. Taking over the Callaway Group is a heavy responsibility, but it is one I accept with humility." "Hear, hear," the board murmured, raising their glasses. To Julian, Samantha beamed, kissing him on the cheek. I raised my water glass. "To the truth," I whispered. No one heard me. Marco and his staff emerged from the kitchen doors. They carried silver platters covered in domes. "The main course," Marco announced.
His voice was steady, but I could see a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. They lifted the domes. Beef Wellington, perfectly golden pastry, the tenderloin cooked to a precise medium rare. The smell of truffle and foie gras filled the air. The board members oohed and ahed. But Marco didn't leave. He returned to the service cart. He picked up a single porcelain bowl on a saucer. He walked to the head of the table. He placed the bowl directly in front of Julian. The conversation stopped. The board members looked at the soup, then at their own empty appetizer plates. "What's this?" Julian asked, looking down at the creamy, gray liquid. "Mushroom velouté," I said. My voice was strong. It cut through the garden chatter like a cleaver. Julian looked at me. His eyes widened. "From last night," I continued, smiling pleasantly. "I instructed Marco to save the rest. It was simply too delicious to waste. And since you said you weren't hungry last night, and I couldn't finish it all—" The color drained from Julian's face so fast it looked like a magic trick. He went from tan to ash in a heartbeat. Samantha gripped the white tablecloth. Her knuckles turned white. She stared at the bowl as if it contained a live cobra. I'm not really a soup person, Uncle," Julian stammered, trying to laugh it off. "Nonsense," I said, leaning forward in my wheelchair. "It's a family recipe, the very soup that launched this company. I insist, Julian. In fact, I won't let the board sign off on the formal transition documents until you toast me with that soup." I looked at the board members. I widened my eyes, playing the eccentric old uncle.
"Go on, son," Arthur, the lawyer, urged gently. "It's just a bowl of soup. Humor him." "Eat up, Julian," Sarah added. The peer pressure was physical. It pressed down on Julian's shoulders. He looked at the bowl. He knew exactly what was in it. He knew the dosage. He knew the crushed oleander seeds. He knew that one bowl was enough to stop a horse's heart, let alone a man. He looked at me. I held his gaze. I didn't blink. "Eat it," my eyes said. "Eat the hate you served me." "I can't," Julian whispered. "What?" I asked. My voice dropped, becoming predatory. "Is there something wrong with the food in my house?" Julian was sweating profusely now. Beads of perspiration rolled down his nose. "I'm allergic," I asked. Julian said, his voice rising in pitch. "Eat the soup, Julian," I commanded. "Yah!" Julian shouted.
He jumped up, his chair screeching against the patio stones. He swiped his hand across the table, knocking the bowl over. The soup splashed across the pristine white tablecloth, staining it like dirty oil. The bowl shattered on the stones. The silence was absolute. The birds stopped singing. The board members froze, forks halfway to their mouths. I asked calmly. The words hung in the air. Samantha stood up, knocking her chair over. She shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He's losing his mind. He's paranoid. He's accusing us of trying to hurt him because of his dementia." Julian yelled, seizing the lifeline. "He's having an episode. Look at him." "Marco," I said. Marco stepped forward. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a remote control. He pointed it at the large floral centerpiece in the middle of the table, where a Bluetooth speaker was hidden among the hydrangeas. He pressed play. Samantha's voice boomed over the lunch, distorted but unmistakable. The board members gasped. Sarah covered her mouth. "Yes," Julian's voice replied, echoing through the garden. "Marco won't notice. It'll look like heart failure." The recording ended. Arthur, my lawyer, dropped his fountain pen. It rolled across the table and fell onto the grass. Julian stood frozen. He was staring at the speaker as if it were a ghost. He looked at the board members, who were looking at him with a mixture of horror and revulsion. "That's," Samantha screamed, desperate. "That's fake!" "The contract you have," I told Arthur, pointing a steady finger at the paper sticking out of Julian's briefcase. "The one they made me sign last night. It is signed by a ghost." Arthur opened the folder. He looked at the signature. "Robert Calloway," Arthur read. "Legally void," I said. "I am still the sole owner of this company." I raised my hand and signaled to the edge of the garden. The hedges rustled. Chief Miller stepped out, looking grim. Behind him were two uniformed officers. "Julian and Samantha Calloway," the chief said, walking across the grass. Samantha tried to run. She spun around on her heels, aiming for the side gate, but her stiletto heels sank into the soft turf. She stumbled, falling to her knees in the grass, weeping and screaming. "He made me do it. He researched the poison," she shrieked as an officer grabbed her arms. "He made me do it. He researched the poison." Julian didn't run. He just stood there, staring at the spilled soup on the tablecloth.
He looked at the stain spreading through the fabric, realizing that his hunger had finally consumed him. "Uncle Rob," he whispered, as the chief clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists. "Don't," I said. They were led away. They were paraded past the board of directors, past the kitchen staff watching from the doorway, past the uncle they had tried to kill. The sirens faded into the distance. An hour later, the garden was quiet. The board members had left, apologetic, shaken, promising to reinstate my full control and launch an internal investigation into Julian's prior dealings. The table was cleared. The stain was gone. I sat at the table alone. The kitchen door opened. Marco walked out. He carried a tray with two simple white bowls. He placed one in front of me and sat down in the chair where Julian had been. Tomato bisque. Simple, safe, warm. "You saved my life, Marco," I said, picking up my spoon. My hand was steady. "You saved me 30 years ago, Chef," Marco replied quietly, looking at the steam rising from his bowl. "When no one else would hire a kid with a record." I took a sip. It tasted like tomatoes and basil and cream. It tasted like life. I looked at the empty chair across from me. The grief was there, a dull, throbbing ache in the center of my chest. I had lost the only family I had left.
The boy I raised was gone, replaced by a stranger in handcuffs. But as I ate the soup, feeling the warmth spread through my body, chasing away the chill of the poison, I realized I wasn't alone. I looked at Marco. I looked at the garden I had planted. I had built a legacy. It wasn't made of brick and mortar, or stock options, or bloodlines. It was made of loyalty. It was made of the people who stayed when the table was empty. I was Robert Calloway. I was 80 years old, and I still had a lot of cooking to do.